Hello and welcome to the Spine Pod. Hey, B.
I am so excited for this episode.
I don't think we could have a better first guest.
You are absolutely right. We could not have sat down with a better first guest. We were able to sit down in Park City, Utah with Dr. Armen Khachatryan with the mountains as a backdrop at his practice.
Take me back to the snow just falling. It was such a good time.
It is such a good time, but what an incredible practice he's built out there. An amazingly well-rounded individual.
Yes.
And what he's done both in his personal and professional life, I think is what makes him a very special character.
He really is. I mean, what he's done for motion preservation and then just the fun life that he lived that we got to talk to him about. I mean, I think if you take a step back and think, what is a patient really looking for from a surgeon, from a doctor? It's somebody with a servant heart. And Dr. Khachatryan is the definition of that.
I think that's one of the big components that makes him stand out is his bedside manner, his personability, his ability to connect with patients, his ability to connect with other surgeons. And I think that's a huge reason why he's so well respected in the spine community.
I agree. And, you know, we had long conversations with him going from cannoli wars to the complexities of spine and what he's excited about on what he's doing in his practice and how he's pioneering, you know, motion surgery moving forward. I got so enthralled in the conversation that the cameras actually died towards the end of it. So if you are watching this episode, towards the end, it does turn into audio only, but you just can't make magic happen twice. And he has so many nuggets of knowledge in there that it's totally worth listening all the way through, because he has this ability to just take these complex topics and make them digestible for anyone, whether you're a patient just starting your journey or you've been in the industry for years. There's something for everyone in this one.
Absolutely. I think we've been very fortunate to get to know him and work with him over the last 5 years and what he's been able to build out there. And for everybody that's listening, if you have not been on his LinkedIn, the cases that he shares, he's sharing the most up-to-date technologies, the newest procedures, and it's amazing what he's been able to build. You know, his commitment to his practice, his commitment to his community, his commitment to his family, and everything that he's done to drive spine care forward, I think is what makes this a really special first episode.
He is the man in motion.
He is the man in motion.
So I think we should let people get to it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So enjoy this one with Dr. Armen Khachatryan.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Khachatryan. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about spine surgery and motion preservation.
Yeah.
We're stoked to be here. We are in Park City with you at your surgery center.
Yes.
What a background. Literally, before we got started, I was like, it'd be great if it was snowing while we were on the podcast. And then 10 minutes ago, it starts to snow. So I think that's a good sign for us today.
It is. Hopefully the cameras can capture how beautiful the setting is.
Yeah.
No, it is so pretty. You know, we've been very lucky to just get to know you over the past few years here in the spine community. You know, I think you're a guy that's probably tough not to know in the spine community with, you know, your accolades precede you. And if I had an hour to sit down and do an intro, I could do one, but we're gonna jump right through, right?
Sure.
But on some of these things, I mean, your background is very impressive, right? In the, you know, the practices that you've started and what you've been a part of, you know, since 2016, you've done more cervical disc replacements than anybody else in the US, right? I mean, that's an accolade within itself.
Well, yeah, you know, a lot of times it comes across as bragging, but it's something that I've been told by the companies that I work with and implants that I use. And when they come back and tell you, well, Dr. K, you're doing quite a few disc replacements and it appears to be more than anyone else in the country, I guess then I guess that gets around. But I try not to, you know, kind of get too braggy about that. What it does actually is just, I feel like with every case that I do, even now, I strive to even greater perfection. I try to do, you know, at the end of every case, I look at the outcome and go like, could I have done something different? And if there is, then you try to implement that. So I think with practice over years, you just kind of hone your craft and hopefully, you know, continue to improve. Because if you're static and you're in the same place, I feel like that's probably about a good time to retire. So,
well, you're by no means static or in one place. I think, like Brady said, you are known in the industry, and we're honored to get to sit down and spend time with you. But even as we were just setting up this podcast today, we're in your waiting room, and we were lucky enough to get to speak to a couple family members of the people you did surgery on today, and just the way they speak about you. Both of the people we got to talk to today came from out of town specifically for you, and spoke so highly of you. So it's not just the industry; it's also patients, which is really important too. You are known for your care and for you pushing the standard forward of motion preservation. So we're so excited to talk about that today.
No, I'd love to talk about that. And I think when it comes to kind of what we do this for, right? Yep. Ultimately, at the end, it is for our patients. We've, as physicians, we many times may forget that, but I've been with family members and more recently, even myself personally, I've been on the receiving end of being a patient. And you realize how scary it is to be in that chair, right? Because for us, it's so pedestrian. It's so
every day.
We do it every day.
Yeah.
So over a period of time, you can kind of get used to it and think to yourself, well, yeah, this is pretty casual. But when you are sitting on the patient's end, you come to realize that it's not. For every one of these patients, it is incredibly challenging and scary decision to make, to trust someone to cut on you, right? And so even though to us, the surgery itself may become, fairly proceduralized, and we try to do things, over and over again, improving on every step. But at the end of the day, when I have a conversation with a patient, the most important thing is to make sure that they feel comfortable. We answer all their questions. We explain why we're doing what we're doing. So even before surgery, we try to kind of have them be as educated and be part of the process and understand exactly what we're going to do, so that after surgery, when they're following our instructions, as they're recovering, they have a really full understanding of that process, and not just, do the surgery and then forget about it,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's a fascinating topic too, because I can't tell you how many surgeons that we've worked with that haven't been under the knife themselves, right? Yeah. And like don't know the other side of the table. Yeah. And then when you say like, oh, well, what would you go get done, or who would you have done? Yeah. Well, I'm not going under the knife. Right? So it's like a complete 180 change of exactly what you're talking about, is not knowing what that other side is, right? Yeah. There's a little bit of,
there is. I mean, typically, I think it's human nature to gravitate towards the worst possible outcome, right?
Sure.
So like, I can't tell you how many times patients will ask me, is there any possibility that I may die? I'm like, yes. I mean, and we always worry about the possibilities, right? Yeah. Instead of probabilities. But in our minds, I think it's just like we're wired from an evolutionary point of view to really think of the worst. Can I have a stroke? Can I die? Can I have a heart attack? Can I be, paraplegic or quadriplegic? The answer is, yeah, it's possible. The good news is I keep telling my patients that it's highly, highly improbable.
Yeah.
So I can say this with complete honesty. I've been in practice for 22 years. I've been incredibly fortunate that I've never had a patient, pass away on the OR table or, have a spinal cord injury. It's just one of those things where it's the patient's worst nightmare, but also as a surgeon as well. Obviously, we worry about something like that. We take all precautions to make sure that we do things safely. But at the same time, it is highly, highly unlikely. And even as I said, when I'm sitting in a patient's chair, I mean, my mind almost, it was intriguing to me how my mind gravitated towards that too as well.
Wow.
Whereby I'm like, man, there's a possibility I might be quadriplegic. And it's just like, it's just truly, it's so interesting once you flip the script and you get into the patient chair, that your mind gravitates towards that. And
it's human nature,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you can know everything and you can be as rational as possible, but it's still just...
When it's your child, your family, and to some degree it seems like rationality flies out the door.
Yeah.
So, I want to talk about motion preservation. I want to talk about a lot of, what you've grown your practice into, but truthfully, I would like to bring it back to the start for some of the people that don't know you, right? You came over here at a young age. You've done some very impressive things, been to some very impressive schools, right? MIT education, and then went to Yale. I mean, you are a very well-educated man, right?
With an interesting life as well, just you as a human. I've heard great stories about your family traveling, biking across countries. And like, I want to know you as a person. I want people to get to know you as a person.
Yes, thank you. So just like so many of us, maybe some people are second or third generation immigrants, but we're all immigrants, right? So I was born in Armenia, and I was about 14 years old when my family decided to move to the United States. People always ask me, "Were you sad to leave your home?" To some degree, yes. I love my city, which is the capital of Armenia, Yerevan, where I grew up. I loved my neighbors. I loved my friends. But when I found out that we were coming to the U.S., I couldn't be more excited, And so when we first landed in L.A., which is where I spent my high school years.
What a place to land.
I know.
The U.S. and then LA. Exactly what
Hollywood,
you think. Yeah,
Hollywood of all places. And I literally, from the house that my uncle helped us rent, I would walk out of the house and you can see the Hollywood sign right,
wow.
So up on the hills. And, over the years, I've tried to describe the difference between growing up in Armenia and what things appeared like and what things, excited me about being in the United States. And I think the best description I've come up with is I feel like I went from a black and white movie to a color movie.
Wow.
It's like that's just like this stark difference between where everything was. And to some degree, Armenia, when I was growing up, there was under Soviet rule, right? So the buildings and everything was very gray. It was just like so. So it wasn't that description that I gave going from a black and white to a color movie. It was probably also true in terms of like what the environment was like, right?
Absolutely.
And then you land in LA in the middle of winter. It was like January 8th, 1980. I remember distinctly when we landed there. It just was like the palm trees and the colors and the cars and everything else was just absolutely so exciting. So to me, from the day I landed, I was like, and you see all this stuff. You see, I think one thing that's very part of the reason why America is so appealing to so many immigrants is because whether you see it in movies or in real life, you just see what's there, what the opportunity is like.
Possibilities.
And you want to, that's right. You look at the possibilities and you really want to, if you have any motivation, if you have any drive in you, you start working towards that. And, so from day one, my mom and dad were incredibly, adamant that we focus on our education. Certainly I had some friends who even in high school and then subsequent to high school, they didn't go on to get an education. They wanted to get a job and, work as some respectable, and some friends did incredibly well as an electrician or a plumber, right? But my parents were, no, we want you to get an education. We really want you to take advantage of what this country can offer. So from day one, they were just incredibly, focused and determined that they provided everything that I needed to make sure that I got a good education. So we landed, and a few weeks later, I started ninth grade in high school.
That is a hard year to move, just to move as a kid in general, but to move to a different country, a different culture.
Yeah.
That's a big year.
The good news was that LA is a very, very, diverse, city. And so the school, both the junior high school as well as the high school that I went to, there were 30 plus countries represented.
Wow.
And something 40 or 50 different languages spoken. So it was a very, very diverse environment. So it didn't, even though I very quickly wanted to learn the language, right? It wasn't like going from 0 to 100 overnight. I had a lot of Armenian friends. I developed friendships with a lot of different, whether it was people from Mexico or from the Philippines or from, I had a very, very good friend both during junior and high school years who was from China. And we were all immigrants, and we're all kind of in the same boat, and we're all kind of gunning for, we're all striving to, once again, take advantage of what this country could offer us, So I spent the next three and a half years in LA. During that time, obviously I was super motivated. I was studying hard and trying to get really good grades. And I remember towards the end of 11th grade, my kind of just where my kids are now, right? They're in 11th grade. We have twins who are looking at colleges. I met with my counselor and he said, "So Armen, where do you want to go to school?" And I said, I think LA City College sounds pretty good. And maybe if I'm lucky, maybe I can get into UCLA. And again, not to, speak discouragingly about those schools, but my counselor looked at my grades and he said, I really think you should try for something a little bit higher, right? And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, well, you should apply to Ivy League schools and these schools on the East Coast. And I go, what's Ivy League?
You don't even know.
I had no idea. So, my college counselor, as well as my high school AP chemistry teacher, these were the two people who were just instrumental in kind of opening my eyes and showing me the opportunities and the choices that were available for me, and helped me tremendously with my applications, and guidance that they provided for me. And they celebrated next year in my senior year when I applied to all these schools, and I got into a number of very, very good schools. And I ended up choosing MIT just because I felt like that was, I was really good in math. I was really good in sciences. I'd never visited Boston.
Wow.
Unlike now where, everyone does college tours,
Yeah.
I landed, I landed in Boston a week before school started. In any case, I chose MIT. And then I also had another, one of my friends that I just referred to, one of my Chinese friends, William, he was a year ahead of me. So he had gone to MIT from our school, and he was just as excited. He called me up before I'd even got the admission letter, because this was the old days, right? There's nothing digital. They published the kind of the admission list in Boston. It took like 2.5 days or 3 days, however long it takes for the letter to get to me. And I knew that I'd already gone to MIT before, most kids, because my friend picked up the phone and called me. He goes like, "You got into MIT.
What a
you gotta
fun
come
way
here,
to
right?"
find out you got in from a friend.
That's right. And then I got the letter a few days later. And then, again, the rest is history, right? I ended up going to Boston. And I loved my experience in Boston. It's such a great city to live in. I made some amazing, amazing friends when I was there. And spent the next 4 years in Boston at MIT. And then it was during those time when I went to MIT, I didn't know I was going to be a physician, or at least it wasn't on my radar screen. My dad always wanted me to maybe do something in medicine, and specifically in surgery. And it was about second year of college where he had a conversation with me about where he thought, medicine would be really good with my personality, kind of like, you can apply the science part of things, as well as I really like being with people. I'm a social person. I like talking to people.
Your energy is infectious for sure. No, it's true though. Like you have the perfect demeanor for being a surgeon, which some surgeons don't have, right? Where you make people feel comfortable, and it's a special trait.
Well, thank you. And that's just the person I am. And, even though I was trying to make a choice between pursuing career in engineering and sciences versus maybe medicine, my dad's argument was, well, it's like you're going to work in a lab somewhere and be kind of somewhat isolated. If you're in medicine, you get to meet someone new almost every single day, right? You see so many patients. You in his mind, he kind of felt like, I should do something in surgical field. So, with my, again, I have tremendous respect for my dad and my mom. And when my dad kind of told me that what was interesting about the way he approached it, he didn't say, "You have to do this." He kind of reasoned with me, and he explained to me at least why he thought this was a good choice. And it made sense to me. So then I kind of shifted gears and started thinking more and more about medical school. And then kind of subsequent to my graduation, I did take a couple years between college and medical school. And did some really fun things.
Yeah. Live some life.
That's right. Decided just to move back to LA, worked at a children's hospital, did some research there. And you mentioned, about riding my bike across the country. I just love biking. So I happened to be at a bike shop to get some parts for my bike to fix it. And I saw this flyer on the wall, again, back in those days where there were like little bulletin boards and people would put flyers on them. It said, ride your bike across the country for free. And to me, it was just like, whoa, I knew there was a catch. But to make a long story short, it was through American Lung Association, and it was a fundraiser. And basically, if you raise a certain amount of money for them, you would be able to get on this trip and ride across the country for free. And we had to raise $5,000. And I can't tell you how hard it was being in this country, an immigrant only for a few years, right? And not knowing anyone. And basically, I tried first at the hospital I was working and, tried to raise a few dollars there, and it wasn't very successful. So then I realized, all right, I'm going to be door-to-door salesman. I literally walked from door to door in Hollywood, knocking on doors, telling, "Hey, my name is Armen Khachatryan. I'm doing this thing, riding across the country for charity. Will you kind of donate 1 penny per mile, right? That's what I was asking for, a penny per mile. And people were like, well, how long are you riding? I'll go 3,400 miles. And so that'd be $34. And most people were like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I ended up raising something like close to $6,000 just knocking door to door, and ended up going on this trip. And the funniest thing was my dad, before I left, I had to fly from LA to Seattle to get on the bike trip was from Seattle to all the way up to Atlantic City in New Jersey. My dad was like, are you sure about this? I was like, Dad, yeah, it'll be really fun. He goes like, look, I know you're a little bit stubborn and you may not tell us if you're having a really hard time or whatever, but it goes like, you just let us know. If you just can't go any further, we'll drive and get you, right?
Wow.
I was like, Dad, I'll let you know, but, I think I should be okay. And there were some times, especially in the first week after you get on a bike and you ride 80, 90 miles a day, where I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go on.
Yeah.
But,
some saddle
I was
sores
like
can
23.
Change your mind.
Yeah, I was only 23 at the time. And, you just keep pushing. And after about 10 days or so, I just felt like Superman. I felt like as long as I can put fuel in my body, I could go on forever. So we made it all the way across the country. And that was another just such an amazing experience to see the middle of the country, which most of us skip, right?
Yep.
Most people are like one coast or the other. And another common question, people are like, wasn't North Dakota or like, Montana, wasn't it boring? And the answer is, I loved it. It was so beautiful. It's just so peaceful, riding through the plains and, meeting some truly, truly amazing people. Like the middle of our country, that's where everything is, as far as like the heart and soul of our country. So I had some amazing experience on that trip. And then I came back, and then the following year, I kind of again pushed through and studied and took the MCATs and applied. And that's when I ended up going to Yale for medical school.
And so when you did your bike trip, you did it once, but you've done it twice actually, right? So once wasn't enough. You said, actually, I need to do this again.
So yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And the way that happened was I started medical school, and I told some of my new friends that I'd met in medical school that, last year I rode my bike cross country. So one of my friends there, Greg Lickelai, he was like, that sounds so cool. Let's do it again. I want to do it, So we kind of thought about what would be the perfect time for us to maybe try to do it again.
Yeah.
And between the second and third year, before you start your clinical rotation, we felt like, well, we'll take 6 weeks off, which is typically rotations for 6 weeks. We'll skip our first rotation, make it up for it in our fourth year, and do this bike trip. So that time around, same thing. We did it through the same organization, but this time around raised money for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Amazing.
And we had a third friend, Chris Gilligan, who heard about what Greg and I are going to be doing. So he was like all on board and said, I'm doing this too. So 3 of us ended up raising something like 25 or something. I think it was like $25,000 or $26,000.
Wow.
To do that bike trip again. And believe it or not, second time around was a little bit harder, because first time I did it, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it, right? But I trained for it. Second time around, we're just finishing up our second year of medical school. We're studying for our boards. So I literally had very few miles under my belt.
You didn't train a lot.
So we didn't train that much. Oh. Mentally, I knew I could do it, but physically, I wasn't ready. So when we flew out, like literally day after we took our boards, part 1 for med school, we flew out and we landed, hopped on our bikes. That first day I remember was 87 miles. And once again, I thought I was going to die. Our legs were so sore. We literally could not walk that night. And how we got up next day and rode another, I think 75 or 80 miles, I have no idea. But we just kind of pushed through it. I kept telling my friend Greg and Chris that just get through the first week. Let's get through the first week. And then after that, it's going to be smooth sailing. Sure enough, by the time we got to the middle of the country, there were some days we did 150 miles for fun. We'd be like, let's just skip this place and go to the next city, right? And see if we can do it. And we would. And that's the beauty of being young and healthy and vibrant. And your body doesn't hurt anywhere other than the soreness in the first few weeks. After that, you can just keep going forever.
It is amazing. So we've also both done long distance bike rides. Nothing like that. But I mean, I did
something like that.
Yeah, but I did 400 miles. And even in that span, 1 or 2 days in, I was like, I can't sit on the seat for another day.
Yeah.
It's not even like the mental side of it's okay. It's like, I legitimately can't sit down. Yeah. So like day 3 and 4 was standing up for half of the time and just trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of a mental battle too, right?
Really sore.
It does.
I mean, again, I'm going to tell you one funny story. On the first bike ride, right? It was, again, about 4 or 5 days into it, one of the other riders said, if your butt is getting sore, it's probably just getting chafed. I go like, I don't know what's going on, but it's really, really sore. And he said, here's what you do, So he told me like, he grew up on a farm. He grew up on a farm. He goes, you got to put some bag balm on there. I go, what the heck is a bag balm, right? And he goes like, well, that's what they use for cow, like for milking for udders, right? So to like keep it moisturized. I go, wow, okay. So middle of the day, we're at some rest stop. He gives me some of this stuff. So I go into the bathroom and I got lathered all over, right? And I get back on the bike. I mean, it feels a little bit better, but I finished that day and I was like, my rear end was on fire. So I go to him, I go like, man, I thought you told me this is going to help. He goes like, it should have helped. He goes, what did you do? I took a big old, whole bunch and I lathered it all over it. And he goes like, no, you're supposed to put very little. So I like literally overdid it. And then later that day, I'm kind of like taking a shower and I look down and I have like blisters on my butt. And I'm like, how am I going to write tomorrow? So anyways, I go over, we had a medic traveling with us. I go over to the medic tent. She was this, young, pretty girl. And I'm just embarrassed to tell her what's going on, right? She goes like, what can I help you with, I go, I got blisters. She goes like, where? I go, on my bum. And she goes like, really?
Really?
I said, really? So I explained to her what's going on. She goes like, can I take a look at it? I go, well, why can't you take my word for it? She goes, well, I kind of need to see before I can help you. And then I drop my pants. She looks at my bum. She goes like, oh. So anyway, she gave me some baby powder. I put it on there. It kind of dried up. And by next morning, she said, put 2 bike pants. So I put 2 bike shorts on. And that was actually a trick that worked really well. And a couple of days later, it was all gone and we're on our way. And so never put too much bag balm on your...
Yeah. Saddle sores are the worst thing. Like I biked from Austin to Anchorage, Alaska for cancer research.
That's right. You told me.
We got to connect on that a lot. And it's, like you said, it gets really hard and you're like, I've got some saddle sores and this is difficult. But once you get going and when it's mission driven, you're like, I've raised money.
That's right.
And people have expectations of like, I got to finish this for them.
Absolutely. Penny a mile. You got to get every penny.
Penny a mile. And I also agree, there's just no better way to see the country than on a bike ride. Yeah. Like on a bike and being a part of it, it's a really magical way to see the country.
Yeah, before I finished college, I read this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's this story about this father and son traveling across the plains on a motorcycle. And he described how it's a little different when you're traveling on a motorcycle, which is similar to a bike. I mean, it's motorized, obviously, but you're outside. You're part of the environment, right? Versus when you're in a car, most of the time you end up, first of all, you're enclosed. And nowadays, almost 100% of the time, our windows are up, so you get no sense of what's going on in your environment. And then also, when you're in a car, you're traveling at a high speed. You're typically on an interstate. And an interstate in Montana looks probably about the same as it does in Texas. It looks probably about the same as it does in, so many other parts of the country. You have to get off the interstate. You have to get on the secondary and small roads. You have to go through small towns. That's when you really get to see, what this country is really built on. And you get to meet the people. You get into the small diners. You go into a small grocery store to buy Snickers or some, water or whatever it is, right? And then you just can't help to think to yourself, how many amazing and beautiful people are out there who are just so welcoming. And literally people will be like, do you have a place to stay? We're like, yeah. We got a tent. We're fine. But so many people were just like, you can come stay with us if you want. We have a free, place in the basement or et cetera. So it was truly amazing experience. not just to see the country, but also to get to meet the people.
Yeah. It really makes you believe in humanity again.
Absolutely.
When you're like, what people are willing to give, shirt off their back of like, you're doing this thing that's so amazing. How can I help you? I agree.
Yeah. And the amount of free beers we got.
I bet. That's what you really did it for, right? It was the free beer.
All the small towns, we'd go into the bar and they'd find out what we're doing. We're riding our bikes across the country. And next thing you know, we're getting all this free beer, So, I went all the way. It was 47 days and I had under $1,000 to my name in my account. And how we made that stretch, it was because insane. It was like we got so much, people were so giving that it lasted. I did not run out of money,
Awesome.
So.
It's absolutely amazing. And that's all before you've accomplished everything what you've accomplished now, right? So, you come back here for your residency and fellowship back to Utah, right? You quickly you're the director of the Desert Orthopedic Center out in California, right, for a while. And then you make the transition back out here where, you found the Disc Replacement Center, you found the Master Spine Institute. Disc Replacement Center has been around 10 years now, about, give or take.
Yeah, about 11 years. It was actually, I take it back. It was February of 2014 or 2013. I guess 11 years. Yeah, 2013. Yeah.
So you've been able to do that. You obviously just being the director of, out in California. And then I'm curious what, one, brought you into spine specifically, but two, what made you break off and want to, do your own thing, found your own center and start on that trajectory rather than, joining into a hospital-based practice?
I guess maybe some people feel like they have a certain destiny that they're fulfilling. I feel like my life has been more of, you're walking through a path and then you see a fork in the road or maybe a couple different forks, right? And then you just kind of go like, well, I really like this one. And it's been a journey where I try to find out what gets me excited, what seems interesting to me, and then combine that with what I feel like I can be good at, right? I can apply my talents, right? Even though growing up, every one of us wants to be, a star athlete. I grew up just absolutely idolizing soccer players and hockey players. And if someone said, you can do this, of course, I'd be like, yeah, why not, right? It would be amazing. But, well, I feel like I am like, I can do most things pretty well as far as when it comes to sports. But there's no way I'm going to be a high-level athlete, right? But then I felt like intellectually I had certain capacities and abilities that I could apply to. And so along the way, whether it was, the conversation that I had with my dad that kind of pushed me more towards medicine, or when I was in medical school, I think it was pretty much the first day when we started our anatomy, there was this, you could tell who are going to be the surgeons and who are going to be the psychiatrists and who are going to be internists, psychiatrists that literally, they just didn't want to smell a body. They didn't want to be in the anatomy lab. The internists kind of showed interest in the different structures, but they didn't want to touch it. And then there were the surgeons who were like in there till midnight, finding the tiny little nerves and dissecting everything out, So I guess it was like, I really enjoy doing this. I felt like I can apply my hands and I can, I felt pretty good about what I was doing. So from very early on in medical school, I knew I was going to do something surgical. And then, you go through your third and fourth year of medical school where you go through all the different rotations. And even then I felt like, man, I can do vascular surgery. I can do ear, nose, and throat surgery. I can do orthopedic surgery. There were all these things that were super fascinating to me. And at the end of the day, I felt like, it's the people that I really enjoyed hanging out with that were in orthopedics. These were the guys who were just, athletic. They were like outdoorsy. They liked to do stuff. So that appealed to me. So again, the combination of what I felt like I could achieve within that specialty, I felt like these are my people. These are the group of people that I want to hang out with, right? And so it was literally, that was the decision. I'm going to go into orthopedics because I like the type of surgeries that you can do in orthopedics. I like the type of people that I'm going to be training with and the type of people I'm going to be, hopefully through the rest of my career interacting with when I go to the different meetings, right? So then I ended up matching in residency at the University of Utah, which was just, and again, interviewed all over the country, but ended up in Utah. And I felt so incredibly fortunate to be in Salt Lake because it's a beautiful place.
So beautiful.
My professors and my attendings whom I trained with, I had some amazing people who just gave me so many just so many abilities and skills and everything that they taught me from understanding, just the orthopedic knowledge base, as well as just teaching me how to be a good surgeon, how to be a good physician, and how to advocate and take care of patients. And then after I finished that, I wanted to stay in Salt Lake, but and my wife, who we had just gotten married a year before I finished my training here, she really wanted to stay here because she's from Salt Lake. But there was nothing available in Utah, so I ended up taking a position in Southern California in Palm Springs, which was another incredibly fortuitous and incredibly fortunate turn that took in my life, because I joined a premier group in Palm Springs with 15 other orthopedic surgeons who were just top-notch surgeons. And almost by association, by the fact that I was part of this group, even though I was just fresh out of training, everyone thought like, well, if this group hired this surgeon, he must be pretty darn good. So,
which is true.
Well, when you're first starting out, it's really hard to figure that out, right? Yeah. The doubt creeps in.
Sure.
As much training as you've had, and you feel like, yeah, I can do this. You're not certain. So it takes a really, really long time of working really hard at it and then getting the feedback from the patients, right? Because ultimately, your ultimate judgment comes from patient coming back and telling you, hey, doc, thank you so much for getting me out of my, pickle, getting me out of my pain. And that takes time. But the fact that I was trusted from the very beginning was what I was referring to, being really fortunate, being able to join a group that was very, very well reputation-wise and allowed me to kind of ride almost on their coattails and then practice orthopedics, practice spine surgery in a way that I felt comfortable with. They never, ever looked and said, well, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z number of cases, et cetera. I felt like my senior partners were always like, hey, do a good job, practice surgery the way we're supposed to do it, and you'll have more work than you know what to do with. And that was the case. So I ended up building the practice there. It was when I was there. So I was there from 2002 to 2007. It was in 2006 when I first put my hands on a cervical disc, and it was part of the clinical trial for MOBC. And again, that was almost before that I had done some lumbar disc replacements, Charité, but it was something about the cervical disc that really got me just going and so interested in motion preservation, because there was just a bigger pool of patients who really kind of, I felt like, could be treated with that technology, right? As we know, hopefully as we get to talk a little bit more about the Modus device, but with lumbar discs, the indications are fairly narrow. So they're, in terms of the number of patients you can really treat with lumbar disc replacement, they're just much, much smaller. So with cervical disc, I got involved in 2006 and never, ever looked back. I felt like this is my home. This is where I really want to, kind of spend the rest of my career, hopefully developing a skill that can be applied and help patients. And it also goes back to one thing I always give credit to is my chairman in the orthopedics department, Dr. Harold Dunn, when I was finishing up before I took the job, which he helped me. He was very instrumental in me getting the job in Southern California. He gave me some good words of wisdom, right? And one of them, as far as my career was concerned, he said, you want to find, as over the next few years, as you get into your practice, you want to find something within that is your passion and really pursue it and become really good at it and be known for it. Those were his words. He said, and then people will seek you out. So those words kind of stuck with me. So when it was 4 years later in 2006 when I started doing cervical arthroplasty, that's when I felt like this is it. This is what he was talking about, And then from that point on, it's just like full steam ahead. I dived into doing arthroplasty. Now, granted, it was very limited because we didn't have in fact, at that time, there was not a disc available in the US that were FDA approved. It wasn't until 2008 when the Prestige ST and then the Protus C came into the market. But even if after those discs came to the market, there was a huge lag period where we can get any type of coverage for it. So we had discs in the market, but we couldn't do them because we couldn't get insurance to pay for it. So it wasn't until about 2012, 2013 when we started to get some coverage for disc replacements. I worked with a number of different companies and advocacy groups trying to get the regions to cover disc replacement, try to get the local healthcare provider insurers to cover disc replacement. So as things started to turn around and we started to see that there's going to be coverage, that's when I felt like, well, this is a good time for me to shift gears and really kind of almost like change the nature and the face of my practice from, even though I have continued, even to this day, I do all aspects of spine surgery. It is, the disc replacement that really has kind of been kind of my passion, my focus. We all know whether it's in the neck or in the low back, there's still some patients who clearly need fusion. I don't think I'm innocent, naive or innocent enough to think that, fusion is going to go away. So patients who have unstable slips or unstable spondylolisthesis, or patients who have acute trauma, or patients, there are a variety of reasons that fusion is still going to be around.
Sure.
But all things being equal, if a same patient can be treated with motion preserving surgery versus with non-fusion type of procedure, I'm always kind of choosing, or at least I'm guiding the patient. Ultimately, I'm not the one who makes the choice. It's the patient who makes the choice. But I'm always trying to show them that I believe motion preservation is better than fusion. And I'm still, to this day, if patient has both those choices, I'm still waiting for a patient to say to me, doctor, I'd rather have fusion.
Yeah.
It just hasn't happened, not a single time.
Yeah.
So.
It's interesting. So you were on the, you said you got your hands on disc arthroplasty for the first time in 2006. I mean, that is the very leading edge of disc replacement. Yep. And I'm curious what either you saw from your educational standpoint or patient outcome standpoint that made you say, this is something different, or this is something that I need to pursue, right? Because there's a lot of guys, even now, doctors out there, and we have plenty of surgical data that are still hesitant to jump into some of those things, right? And I'm curious for you, what you saw, either whether it was patient outcomes or, biomechanics wise, of why you said, wow, this is something different that I need to pay attention to and start to chase.
So, you can approach it from two different perspectives, right? One could be more of a scientific approach to it and data-driven. And I think the second approach is more philosophical. Philosophically, to me, preserving motion in a joint that was designed to move. And I always kind of preface this by telling people, I don't care whether you believe it from an evolutionary point of view or from, that God created this. Doesn't matter. The fact is we're born, our knees move, our hips move, our spine moves, our hands move, everything moves, right? So if you take that as a given, that that's the way we were designed to live our lives, then from that philosophical perspective, anything you can do to preserve that, I think is a noble cause. In fact, when you go into orthopedics, I'd never, in my entire 6 years of training, I never saw a knee fusion. Yep. I saw hundreds of knee replacements. I saw a couple hip fusions in pediatric, setting where there's really nothing left there. The joint was completely gone. There was no bone stock. So it was just like, almost like, absolute worst case salvage procedure. But even there, so the entire approach, once again, from philosophical point of view, as well as just from practical point of view within orthopedics, was to rehabilitate the musculoskeletal system, to rehabilitate the joint, and to preserve it. So, after I finish my total joint rotation, you go into spine rotation within my training, and you see the first case and it's fusion. You kind of come out of it. I came out of it going like, why are we replacing these joints? And yet in the spine, we're fusing it. And I think clearly spine is a more complex environment. Sure. There's much more intricacies involved, and especially, how do you preserve the movement and still kind of not threaten the neural structures? So there's that aspect of it. So I think the lag was there because the kind of our understanding, as well as technology and the biomaterials and everything else, had to catch up with where we wanted to get to. But that seed had been planted in my mind in 1997, over 10 years prior to when I first put my hands on a cervical disc. And so once you plant that seed and then you see an opportunity to be able to kind of fulfill kind of what your, philosophical approach or your mission or your, kind of what your goal was, I think it becomes natural, So it wasn't, to me, it's almost like I didn't have to talk myself into it at all. It was like, yes, this is what I've been searching. It's like, there's all kind of fables and stories about people like searching across the desert for whatever, for true love or true something, right? True, kind of philosophical or some intellectual kind of pursuit, right? To me, it was very much I'd been seeking it, and it just kind of lands in your arms, and you go, okay, this is where we're going.
And I think also, I really connect to you saying it was a noble cause. And I think that's right, because we're in an interesting place in spine right now where disc replacements have started to be more accepted in the industry. Patients understand and know what a disc replacement is. We'll hopefully talk about lumbar total joint replacement later, of like in the low back, there still isn't a lot of options other than fusion. And it's a noble cause to say, this is how your body was meant to be. We should continue to push the standard of care so that patients have those options. And I think just how you said, you just saw it and you're like, yes, this is it. This makes sense. Patients know that too in their own body.
Yeah.
They know, I don't want to be fused.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
And they innately know it and they understand their body. And it's difficult of a lot of times patients are still only given the option of fusion.
Yeah.
And I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that, of why you think it takes so long, and that evolution, even just for disc replacement. We're talking 10, 15 years later, we're still working on that acceptance and even just insurance coverage, right?
That's right.
But even just your colleagues, of why you think it takes so long, and kind of just okay with fusion and lack of motion being the standard.
Yeah, so Brady asked me a question about, was there something about the patients or the outcomes? So I'll go back to that. I do think there's something to that as well, right? When we look at the data, both in the lumbar spine and the cervical spine, for the patients who have the right indications, there's no question that I think the data is superior. When we look at adjacent segment problems, when we look at reoperation rates, there's no question that patients do. Those parameters favor arthroplasty much more than fusion does. Plus, I do think that the patients who do end up with some sort of motion preserving surgery tend to be happier. And it's almost like, it's when you get injured and then you recover from it, you feel like you got away with one, right? Now, even today, I did 2 surgeries. I did 3-level cervical disc replacement. I did a lumbar fusion. The cervical disc replacement had been told by multiple surgeons needs 3-level fusion. In that patient, I felt, given the pathology, given my skill set, there's no question I could do 3-level arthroplasty, and the patient, I think, is going to do very well. The second patient I did a lumbar fusion on, it's a lytic grade 2 spondylolisthesis, really unstable. I just don't think we currently have the technology to do something, at least not in my hands, at least not anything that's available to me in the US, that could take that patient and do something motion preserving, given the patient's very significant, kind of almost like life-changing pain, right? You have to do something. So I think we ended up doing the right surgery for that patient as well. Now, once again, I'm going to go back to what I said, a little while ago, which is, given all things being equal, if both options are available for a given patient with a given pathology, there's no question in my mind that doing the surgery that preserves the motion is the better way to go.
Well, and you can't blanket statement, right?
Yeah.
It's every patient, every anatomy is different. So you have to look at every case.
But if both options are on the table, I think I see no reason. I think some surgeons argue that, well, they look at few parameters. They may look, let's say, postoperative, leg pain. Like when we look at the VAST pain scores for the arm or the leg, they may argue and say, well, it's about the same, or so you can cherry pick and look at few parameters and say, well, there's no significant difference between fusion and disc replacement. I have, given, I don't know, I've lost count. I've given so many talks and presentations and taught so many surgeons when it comes to cervical arthroplasty. And, and I continue to keep on top of the literature that's coming out, right? And what I can tell you is, and I've challenged many surgeons to provide evidence to the contrary, which is, even if you're arguing that arthroplasty is similar to fusion, right? All right, well, depending what data set we're looking at, depending what study we're looking at, there are some where arthroplasty is equivalent to fusion. There are some that it's superior to fusion, but there's not a single parameter that I've ever seen in the literature where arthroplasty does worse than fusion. I haven't seen that yet. And I've challenged surgeons all over the country and all over the world. If you come across that data point, please share that with me, because I'd love to see it. So I do think that it's superior. But even if we were to go with the premise that arthroplasty and fusion have similar outcomes, okay? I go back to philosophy, which is we were born with motion. The given segment in the lumbar spine or in the neck was designed to move. Mm-hmm. So even if everything was equal, why wouldn't you want to keep that motion, right? So to me, there's no other approach. If someone can provide an argument contrary to that, right? And the only argument contrary to that would be if there was a significantly superior, or there was something with arthroplasty that was worse than it was with fusion, then I could consider the counter argument and say, all right, well, let's take a look at this. And maybe in some patients that might be better, right? But if both options are available for the same patient, for a given patient with a given pathology, I do think even if we would consider that the outcomes could be either similar or equivalent, I do think arthroplasty, or whether it's arthroplasty or total joint replacement, like in the case of the Modus device, or even just a simple decompression, right? Where you're just doing a decompression where you don't necessarily have to fuse the spine, I think that's a better way to go. So that's kind of the first choice. The only reason to fuse the spine is if that's the only way to treat the given pathology and there's no other option.
Absolutely. I think it brings up such a fascinating point that I think about a lot. And the reason that we go into the surgery in the first place, right? Pain reduction for the most part, right? People are coming in, they've got a problem, they're coming with pain reduction. Yep. And I think one could argue that whether you do a fusion or an arthroplasty in the 6 months, year, 2 years afterwards, you're going to get a pain reduction. You should, right? You have a good, a positive surgery and a positive outcome. You should get a pain reduction. One of the things that I think about that, doesn't get talked about as much is quality of life, right? And those are two different things, right? And this isn't talking about what you were talking about earlier, right? Professional athletes and some of this category that a lot of people think out. We're talking about, people that want to play with their grandkids, right? Bend over and pick up their grandkids. If you want to, turn around to see if a car is parked behind you, right?
That's right.
Like all the everyday activities that we're doing. And that's where I think, arthroplasty is where we start moving towards. Because if we look at pain reduction as a whole and they say, oh, these parameters are similar at 2 years, that's reasonable. But at 5 years and 10 years, and what are you allowed to do in that 5 years, 10 years, 15 down the road, that I don't hear talked about as much. And I don't know if you hear that, on the industry side of things or on the physician side of things as well.
I mean, I think most of the outcome measures that we still continue to use, it seems like they're very much focused on pain and some of the other symptomatic relief, right? So whether it's weakness or numbness, but predominantly pain. We look at the VAS pain score, we look at the, ODI, NDI. It seems like they're heavily weighted towards symptomatic relief and not so much, again, there are some of the parameters that ask patients, as far as functionally what they can and cannot do. But I think when you're in pain and it's not getting better with medication, it's not getting better with some of the simple things that you try to do short of, considering surgery. And if that pain, gets to be significant enough, I think most of us will be like, all right, just cut me up, do whatever you need to do. Yeah,
just get rid of it.
Get rid of the pain. I mean, pain is mentally, it starts out physically kind of taxing, but it becomes, I think, emotionally and mentally becomes very taxing as well. So I think at least the way I look at it was that if you are in pain and you have surgery and it gets better, with fusion, it's almost like you've given up something to get that symptomatic pain relief, right? And that something is function. Now, whether the tools that we use to measure that function are sensitive enough to measure it, okay? That's a whole nother question. I do think that the tools are not that sensitive yet for us to be able to say, well, with the single level fusion, you haven't really lost that much function. But the fact of the matter is that it's incremental. Like we have, 5 lumbar discs. If you fuse 1 or 2 of them, well, you've effectively taken away somewhere in the range of 20 to 40% of the function. I mean, that's like simple math. We don't have to sit around and argue about it. It's simple math. So in contrast, when you look at, if you're doing a disc replacement, whether it's 1 level, 2 level, or 3 level, like the one that I just did today, that's a patient who was able to achieve, I hope, very likely, right? we shouldn't count it until it's done. But I'm very, very optimistic given how well the surgery went and what I did with him, and given my past experience with these type of surgeries, that I feel quite confident this patient is going to get very good relief, and hasn't given up anything to get it, right? And it's not uncommon for us. It's all over LinkedIn. You know, I've been fairly active over the past 2-3 years on LinkedIn. I post what I do. Some other surgeons post what they do. And it's not uncommon for us to see a patient who's had 2 or 3 level cervical fusion. Next thing you know, they're having a level above down. And next thing you know, we see these like unbelievable, you know, what look like these, you know, erector sets of spines of C2 to T2 front back fusions that everyone kind of like drools over because it looks so beautiful. It's almost like, I don't know, it's crazy that we look at that and go like, oh, that's like actually good. So it's just, it's to me, that goes against everything. As I said, you know, you start out with a philosophical approach to life and philosophical approach to function, philosophical approach to everyday kind of, you know, what you want to do, right? I'm a very active person. Any day that I don't exercise, I feel like, you know, I almost like I wasted that day.
Yeah, right? That's this guy too.
Yeah, you know, there's something that I want to do that gets my body moving, gets my heart rate high, gets me sweating, right? And I feel like if I couldn't do that, you know, it would be, I'd get depressed, you know? So when we have these patients, maybe we gave them pain relief, and yet they're having a hard time moving because their entire cervical spine or entire lumbar spine from T10 to the pelvis is fused, you know, it just makes no sense to me. Again, there may be some very, very rare and unique circumstances where that may be the only option available, but typically starts out with something small, and then it kind of escalates with 1 level fusion, 2 level fusion, maybe, you know, or like in some cases, maybe 3 or 4 level fusion, but then it inevitably kind of, so even the patients that I end up doing fusion, my goal with them is like, look, let's do the least amount possible, and let's get you back. And I want you to be really functional. I want you to really pay attention to your weight, to your exercise routine, everything, so that you can continue to remain as active as possible, so we can hopefully prevent that adjacent segment problem that, you know, quite commonly comes with fusions.
So you really take a holistic approach for your patients. It's not just what you did on the table. It's very much what happens before and after.
Absolutely.
For success. What would you say for patients, you know, who are potentially listening right now, and they've gone, because I see this all the time, you know, in my day job, I'm communicating with patients, I'm online seeing what patients are talking about. And they'll say, I went to 2, 3, 4 different spine surgeons, all telling me I need a fusion, and I really don't want it. What would you say to those patients who aren't being given another option, aren't having the type of conversations you're having with patients of like, let's look at you holistically, let's look at all the options? What would you tell them of the best way to have those conversations, or what they should do to kind of be able to broaden their options and find more than just fusion?
So I think probably first of all, it's very challenging, right? If you're in a patient's shoes, especially if you have something that comes on fairly acutely and you want to find some sort of solution, it's not like you have the luxury of time and you can, you know, get 3, 4, 5 different opinions. If you can, I think that's certainly a must, right? And then even if you thought about that from a practical point of view, you know, it's so hard to get in to see a spine surgeon. You know, some surgeons are backed up 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, you know, so you can't wait that long. But I do think that if you can find a surgeon who really is truly practicing in their everyday surgical life and offering both options, right? That is to say, a surgeon who's doing both fusions and, let's say, disc replacements. Let's just take those two kind of categories, right? Then I think that surgeon is going to be much more likely to kind of look at your problem from a very, I would say, neutral point of view and say, well, let me figure out, at least give you and explain to you why we're going to do X versus Y, right? Unfortunately, many surgeons just are so much, I think their entire practice is built around fusions. Perhaps that was because that's all they were trained in, or perhaps that's all they feel comfortable doing, and will tell patients, well, you're just not a very good disc replacement candidate. I mean, I can't every single time I do clinic, I see patients for second and third opinions. And these aren't like, I can see, let's say, if it was a patient who was like 75 years old, it's got a very collapsed disc space, it looks very challenging, maybe close to impossible to do disc replacement. Even those patients, I'd be like, I'm gonna give it a try, right? But I can see those patients getting that opinion. But when you have a 35-year-old or a 40-year-old who's getting an opinion and they're being told you need a 2-level cervical fusion, when they're absolutely, they meet at the classic simple criteria for disc replacement. When you have someone like that, you kind of start wondering what is going on, right? So I think from a patient's perspective, seek out surgeons who do actually practice motion preserving surgery and see if you're a candidate. I get requests all the time, and I mean it all the time across the country, and patients will upload their x-rays into our system. I'll take a look at it. I'll take a look at a simple form that they fill out and complete to see what their symptoms are like and what their x-rays and MRI may look like. And I may look at it and go like, yeah, I think if your symptoms kind of match up with what I see on the x-rays and the MRI, I tell, at least, over our digital communication, that I think you'll be a good candidate for possible motion preserving surgery. Subsequently, we'll set up an actual telehealth appointment and discuss it. But, and then there'll be some that I'll tell them, no, I don't think motion preservation is going to work for you. But my approach to it is I'm able to look at it and objectively say that, yes, this is a good case for motion preservation versus this one is not, because I feel comfortable offering both, right? But if my only, that proverbial kind of, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You want to find someone who also has a screwdriver. So maybe, you get a screw instead of a nail.
That's a great analogy. It's so true. Yeah.
So it's an interesting topic too, because we're very, consumer driven. People do a lot of research into things they buy, things they go do, right? Almost anything you go do, you can go get reviews on now, right? That's right. And to the, the point that you just made, I think we're starting to see a little bit of change in spine care, right? Of patients. I'm curious how your practice has changed in the last, 15, 20 years, 30 years, everything that you've seen.
5 years.
Yeah, because we're starting to see patients that are coming in and saying, I was told I need a fusion. I'm seeking an alternative, right? 15 years ago, I don't think we were seeing as much of that. But as more of this data continues to accumulate, as more people, surgeons like yourself that are pushing the envelope, providing better options, patients are seeing like, I don't have to sacrifice just to get a pain reduction. I can still get my quality of life. Have you seen that in your own practice where you're getting more almost patient-driven care as opposed to the other way around, where surgeons are just providing, here's the one option?
Yeah, I think certainly, with the internet and what's going on, all the information available to us digitally, there's no question that things have evolved to the point where patients have become more savvy. They're able to find out more information. Even if we go back 10 years ago, right? When I started doing disc replacement here in Utah, it took us a really long time to get the message out there that this was available here, because a lot of patients were traveling outside of US. They were going to Europe to have disc replacements performed. To this day, there are still some patients who will travel to Europe to get a multi-level disc replacement done in the lumbar spine, because even though we have the technology here, it's been very challenging for them to get it done here because insurance has not been covering that. So economically, it was more viable to go there. But it took us a long time to educate the patient population that for 1 and 2 level cervical disc replacements, for 1 level lumbar disc replacement, and now for even 3 or 4 level cervical disc replacement, depending what kind of coverage they have and who we can talk to about getting the surgery paid for, we may sometimes get that covered. And there are some patients who, not surprisingly, they treat their health with such degree of respect that they're willing to pay cash for it, whether it's here or to go to Europe to get these procedures done, right? So I think, first of all, since we're in the thick of it, right? I've been doing this now for 10 plus years with the Disc Replacement Center. To me, it seems like the change has been so incredibly slow.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, like, 10 years is not that long. And I think over the next 5-10 years, I do think that, there's going to be more rapid adoption of motion preserving technology and surgery. Implants are going to become available to us, hopefully one of them being Modus, that will give us more options that we can offer to our patients. And at the end of the day, the consumer is going to drive the direction of the care that we provide. I think as a surgeon, if you're in a community and there's, let's say, 5 surgeons and 4 of them are offering only fusion, and one is offering arthroplasty and fusion, I think most of those surgeons who are only offering fusion are likely going to be sitting on their ends and kind of, looking for work.
I agree.
So I think consumers, as they become more savvy, as they do more research, as we put out more information out there, I mean, what we're talking about today is hopefully part of that collective information that we're trying to put out there as far as options available for our patients, so that then they can seek it out. And at some point in time, there's going to be just this, like, you get this kind of the threshold, and above which just things kind of really rapidly start moving.
Yep.
I hope we get to that before I retire. I would love to see that day where we walk into a spine meeting, right? I mean, you go to the biggest spine meetings, you walk onto the floor of where all the vendors are, right? And obviously the patients don't get to see this, but 90%, I would say over 90% of what's being offered in that hall are fusion-based implants.
Yeah.
Which is just mind-boggling, right? Yeah. That there's so much money and so much focus and so much, technology going into how to put a screw and how to do fusion, instead of all that intellectual capacity should be going into how do we preserve the movement? How do we keep this patient functional?
Yeah.
So I do hope that as we put more and more information out there, as patients become more, again, informed about the options available to them, they will continue to push medicine and surgery more towards functional spinal surgery.
Talking about conferences, I think that is so interesting. Being newer to the industry and going to the conferences, I came into the industry in a motion preservation company, so that has been my lens. Yes. And also very much just like, oh yeah, well, this makes sense, And when I walked into my first big conference and was like, oh, I'm at one of the maybe only or one of 2 or 3 exhibits that has anything for motion preservation. Right. I was astonished. And then I walked around. It's like, look at my new beautiful purple screw compared to my old blue screw. It's so much better because it's purple. And it's wild to me because there is so much intelligence and, spine surgeons are the elite of the elite. It's, that it's very difficult to become a spine surgeon. And it's not just the surgeons, right? It's the industry moving it forward too, which I think patients don't understand of. You can ask for more, but the industry and those who make it also have to push that forward.
But again, consumers have to continue to demand it.
Yep.
And if that demand is there, at the end of the day, the industry has to respond.
Yep.
And
that's the hope,
I think
right?
innovation, again, innovation will come because there's a demand for it. If there's no demand for it, then typically innovation takes time. And certainly kind of when we look at how Dr. Hodges kind of approached, Scott Hodges approached the lumbar spine, and he felt like, there has to be a better way than just what's out there. And again, I mean, when I first saw the Modus implant, this was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I was the one who, reached out to him. I said, hey, I really want to know more about this, and at the time, he was doing some of these surgeries outside of the US. And he told me that, at some point in time, we'll try to do a clinical trial to see if we can introduce this implant to the US market. And I told him, when you do that, please keep me in mind. I would love to be involved with this. Because again, when we look at the options that we currently have with 2 lumbar discs that are currently in the US market, with Sentinel's ProDisc L and with Aesculap's Active L, again, 2 very, very good technologies, but the indications for those implants are so narrow with basically it comes down to one pathology, discogenic back pain, right? That it excludes a lot of other problems that are still currently being treated with lumbar fusion. The beauty of what, kind of Scott's genius in this designing of this implant was that, allows us to take patients who have more than just a degenerated disc. It allows us to take patients who have very severely stenotic spines, who have significant facet disease, and treat these patients that are typically now being treated with fusions, that we can hopefully, shift those patients over and start treating them with this device. I'm super, super excited and hopeful that as we continue to finish out and await kind of the minimum 2-year follow-up for the clinical trial, that we get the results, we get it to the FDA, we get the implant on the market. And I believe that if the results hold and the implant comes to the market, it will. Again, this is my belief, and I don't know. I've predicted a lot of things about motion preservation that so far haven't come true. But
so don't go to Vegas with it.
Well, but I'm still gonna predict that it will change the face of lumbar spine surgery.
I want to take a step back, kind of just to some background too of you talking about Modus and Dr. Scott Hodges. Kind of how we know you is through Spine, which is the company that we work for, and
yes.
we met you through the Modus lumbar total joint replacement clinical trial. And Brady, I'll kind of let you give some background on that for anyone listening on what that is, and then I'd love to just spend a little bit more time with you,
Sure.
kind of just talking about that, because that's where we wanted to start this podcast because we saw that there's a gap in knowledge for patients and in the industry about motion preservation, innovation, and just wanting patients to have this knowledge directly for them. So we're passionate about Modus, obviously, but we haven't talked about it yet.
We have not.
No.
So I guess maybe I jumped ahead, but
no, it's great.
Like it was a very natural, it is again part of this whole,
it is,
approach that I take to patients come to see us, and for a brief period of time, for about 6 months, from May of 2023 to end of December 2023, we had this option available for our patients. Again, not all patients who have significant lumbar pathology would qualify for this particular device, but at least the ones that for years and years and years we were treating with fusions, at least for a brief period of time. For a few lucky patients, were able to offer motion preserving option. I think again the results so far for my patients have been very, very good, and I'm continue to be very hopeful and excited to see how the next year and a half to 2 years, how the results hold up, and hopefully the device comes to the U.S. market.
And I just want to clarify for anyone listening too, Modus is the first lumbar total joint replacement. So I don't know that we've clarified that specifically, but it is a total joint replacement for your low back.
Yeah, so if we go back to kind of the basics of understanding what the lumbar spine or the spinal column looks like, it's divided into multiple segments. So those are the vertebrae. And if you look at each segment, there's effectively 3 joints, and there's the disc in the front, which bears most of the weight-bearing kind of function of the spine. And there's 2 small joints along the back of the spinal column called the facet joints. And typically when we look at, going back to your question in terms of the 2 lumbar disc replacements that are out there, why are they somewhat limited in terms of their application, is because they're only treating that single joint in the front of the spinal column, which is the disc. The 2 joints along the back, which are the facets, are very commonly involved in the aging spine pathologies, right? As our spines age, it's not just the disc that tends to go bad, but also the facet that tends to go bad. And along with that, as the facets kind of become degenerated and they start overgrowing, they many times will grow into the spinal canal where the nerves are typically and normally residing, and cause narrowing and pinching of those nerves. So then, along with arthritic back pain that most of us will get as we age, if you happen to also encroach and narrow the spinal canal where the nerves are residing, you're going to start getting very incapacitating leg pain, numbness, weakness, a lot of dysfunction, right? So if you have a patient that's got purely disc-based disease that's causing back pain, those patients can be treated with artificial disc replacement. But if you, prior to Modus kind of becoming as one of our options that has gone now through the enrollment of the clinical trial, and we're now kind of doing the follow-up and the result phase of the trial. Prior to Modus being an option for us, patients who had significant facet disease combined with narrowing in the spinal canal that required a decompression to take the pressure off the nerves typically would end up with fusion. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why I think it's really important for all of us to understand that Modus is more of a total joint replacement where you're replacing all 3 joints of that segment, versus a disc replacement is just a replacement of the disc itself. Similar to a knee replacement, right? You can have a replacement of just one condyle of the knee versus the other, versus, the patella. So when you're doing a knee replacement, it is a total knee replacement. Mm-hmm. You're not just even though options are available to do unipole or like single condyle replacements for the knee, I think what's the beauty of this device with Modus is that it gives us the option to treat a much wider variety of pathologies involving not just one or two joints, but all three joints, and effectively treat all three at the same time. So I think that is what has certainly kind of gotten my attention from the very first moment I looked at it online, and I kind of wanted to understand how this works. What's interesting about the Modus device is it's very, very different from anything else out there, right? So it is alien to all of us. So when you first see it, especially if you don't hold it in your own hands, you kind of see it online, you see a picture of it, and maybe see an animation or video of it, right? I think most surgeons, I mean, I was a little bit like that, but in me, it created a bit of excitement. But I think most surgeons kind of approach it a bit skeptical about it. They kind of go like, this looks really odd. This looks, different. It's like nothing else that we've seen out there. So I think that skepticism is something that we're going to have to clearly overcome. And I think the way you overcome that is with results and data, right? So, but at least for now, I keep kind of going back and repeating myself over and over again. I am super, super excited about, the prospects of having a total joint replacement implant available to me as a surgeon that I can hopefully, once we get the FDA approval, that I can hopefully offer to my patients.
Well, it makes a lot of sense for your practice, right? The evolution of your practice of you are focused on motion preservation. That's a lot of what you do all day. Yes. Motion surgery is the direction that you're going, and you just want another tool in your toolkit to, as you said, you give your patients all the options and they get to choose. And hopefully the data will say that this is another option for the low back that you don't have right now, that'll just continue to push for that motion preservation and spine being kind of the direction we go as an industry.
Yeah. I mean, again, historically, when we look at orthopedics, it wasn't like the first hip that Charlie designed is the hip we still use. Right. But it was truly revolutionary. It changed the nature of orthopedic surgery and changed how we treat the hip pathology. And I have no doubt in my mind that this is not the final stop. Sure. This will evolve, redesigns. There'll be, as our understanding evolves, as we get more and more data. But at least it's a very, very good start. And so far, I mean, again, when you look at this and compare it to the fusion, right? It's even if we end up getting equivalent outcomes, the fact that we preserve the movement in that segment, to me, is a huge, huge step forward for surgical treatment of the lumbar spine, even if the results are equivalent. I certainly think that, and I hope that the results show that it's superior, right? Especially if we start measuring some of the functional, parameters that are relevant to the patient and not just pain relief. Yeah. But even if the results are equivalent, and which was the argument that I made a little bit earlier in this podcast, about the cervical spine, even if every surgeon came to me and said, well, the results are about the same, it goes back to, if I can do the surgery and preserve function versus not, why not choose the one that preserves function?
It's funny because the point that you brought up about when anybody sees it for the first time, industry surgeons, patients, usually the first thought is, this makes sense. Motion makes sense in my head. That's right. Motion preservation makes sense in my head. But this seems a little crazy. And I'll be honest, when I first came here and I saw it, I thought, this is like compared to what was out there, right? Yeah. There's nothing like it. Yeah. And there's a reason, it's been able to do what it's done so far, but there's nothing like it. But then you start to play with it and you see it and you see that you are recreating the joint, right? Instead of just replacing aspects, right? We have, TOPS just recently got approval, right? So we've got a facet replacement.
Which is great.
Yeah. And we've got, Active L long-term, Pro Disc long-term. We've got disc replacements, right? And what I was amazed by is we can take care of all of those things, right? In the right patient, in the right pathology, we can, help correct sagittal balance. There's always two things when I talk to patients. I'm curious, what your approach is, but, seeing this for as long as I have, there's two things that we're trying to correct for, right? And we have to provide stability and we have to provide motion, right? And if you go in and remove posterior elements, you can lose some of that stability if you just have the disc, right? In some situations. Well, through this device and seeing it long enough, we can recreate some of that, right? With the Modus implant, you can recreate that stability. You're essentially moving, where the native facets are up into the disc space, but they do the same exact job, right?
That's
you're
right.
resisting against shear, you're resisting against translation, any torsional motion, which is exactly what the facets would do in a native spine. But it's interesting seeing that hesitation at the forefront. And now it is education based and getting it in the hands of the right people like yourself, like these other surgeons that are pushing it forward across the US, and then waiting for these outcomes. Because the truth of the matter is the data will speak for itself, right? Whether it, long-term outcomes are good or where that sits, the data will speak for itself. And now we're kind of in that position of, education, training, and awareness really for another alternative for motion preservation in the spine.
Yeah. And then obviously that's super, super important when it comes to educating our patient population regarding that. I think it's just as important to educate the surgeon population and to really, I think surgeons by nature are self-confident, and maybe if we took a slightly more negative take on things, maybe almost self-arrogant or too arrogant, right? So I think this is a type of technology that you have to be humble enough as a surgeon to look at it and say, look, it is very, very different from anything else that I've seen, very different from anything else that I've been trained on, and really understand, first of all, how it works. Second of all, understand what you can take away as far as anatomically from the patient, right? And what you need to preserve. And you need to understand how you size it, how you position it. So all the technical aspects as well as biomechanical aspects have to be really, really well understood, because a device like this, it can be incredibly powerful. It can treat so many different things and can be, as I said, change the face of spine surgery. But I do think that every surgeon who comes to it and starts wanting to incorporate that into their practice has to come to it from a point of humility rather than from a point of like, well, I can do this. It looks like just, bilateral pliffs, right?
Exactly.
And, the difference between bilateral pliffs and this is like with bilateral pliffs, you can pretty much destroy whatever you want to destroy, take anything out that you want. You're going to put 4 screws, you're going to put bilateral pliff implants, and it's going to work as long as the fusion heals, right? Similar to what I've kind of believed for a long, long time. And anytime I talk to surgeons who are thinking of adopting cervical arthroplasty, even though it may seem that anterior cervical decompression and disc replacement is very similar to decompression and fusion, you have to treat it very differently. You have to really understand the technique. You have to understand the biomechanics. And if you do so, you're going to get very, very good results. If you don't, you're going to have some very poor outcomes and you're going to have really unhappy patients. So I really hope that the results from a clinical trial continue to come in, and we go through the first couple of years and submit the data to the FDA. And I hope that we get a approval for it. Its subsequent adoption and kind of usage of this implant has to be done very purposefully and intentionally. And the surgeons who want to be involved in it, they really need to take the time to train and learn from immense experience from Scott, from Dr. Hodges. I felt like he was instrumental in the cases that I did to impart what he had learned, right? He literally he was at the very tip of that spear going into the dark and putting a lot of faith in what he had envisioned as far as the implant and putting a lot of faith into his ability to do the surgery, right? But I think having someone like him impart his experience and knowledge to me, and then hopefully over a period of time, as I get more and more understanding and more experience with this device on my own, I can do the same thing for other surgeons, right? But I don't think this is one of those things where you can just jump in and do a lab for half a day and then go back to your practice and do it on your own and get a good, successful outcome. It is a technically demanding procedure that does require a very good understanding of how do you take away what needs to be taken away, preserve what needs to be preserved, as well as how do you position the implant. If you do those things, I really think it's going to work incredibly well.
That leads me to my question for you, just about the state of spine right now. As you specialize in disc replacement, right? You are known for that. do you see kind of how orthopedics, it's specialized, right? If you're doing hip replacements, you're known for doing hip replacements and you're doing those all day, every day, or knee replacements or shoulder replacements. Do you see the evolution of spine moving that same way as we see more motion preservation of you will have the guys who are just going to specialize in motion preservation, specialize in something like Modus and disc replacements, and you come to them for doing that. It's not something that's just in your tool belt you do every once in a while. I mean, with any motion preservation technology.
Yeah, so obviously we've seen it within orthopedics, right? There's the hip surgeons, the knee surgeons. Now there are surgeons who do purely just shoulder.
Yeah.
And I think even within spine, we already have seen a bit of that. For example, deformity versus non-deformity surgeons, right? I think there's going to be further kind of subspecialization and where surgeons start really focusing in and doing one or two things really, really well. Motion preservation is going to be one of them when we're talking about implant-based motion preservation, right? So something like Modus or lumbar disc replacement in the form of like a ProDiscal or something, or in the cervical spine. But then there's also a whole nother field that's really taken off, I think, over the past couple of years, which is the endoscopic approach to the spine, which is also a motion preserving treatment for the pathologies in the spine, where previously we thought was almost unthinkable. And even now, there are a number of surgeons who are very, very well versed and have a very good experience with endoscopic approach to the spine, especially outside of the US when you go to Europe and to parts of Asia. So I do think, yes, that's going to happen. And I do think that, just like I wouldn't pick up I'm not an endoscopic spine surgeon. I'm not going to pick up an endoscope, even though I had some training when we did ACL reconstructions or knee meniscal tears, et cetera. I have some training in that 20 plus years ago. I wouldn't dare pick up an endoscope right now without spending significant amount of time with a surgeon who has a good experience with that, trained to become a good endoscopic spine surgeon. I do think that with the motion preserving arthroplasty type of surgeries, that evolution will have to take place, and that training will have to also take place for surgeons to feel comfortable utilizing this technology. Absolutely.
I think even on the specialty side, it's funny how you bring it up, but I mean, you've carved out that niche for yourself, right? In motion preservation. I mean, you have people, we saw it today, we've seen it throughout the trial. You have people traveling from all across the US to come get care. And it's because they're seeking out something very specific, right?
Well, in industry, you're known for it and respected for it, and patient wise. I mean, it was really cool to get the chance while setting up this podcast today, just to hear from the family of the patients that you treated and the love they had for you too, which was really cool.
Wednesday I had clinic, and there's times where it gets to be really busy, and it's, you're running from one room to another, and it just gets hectic. And it was probably about 3:00 in the afternoon. I was just starting to look at the clock and going, when is this day going to be over? And Matt, who's our nurse practitioner, Matt Allred, he sees a lot of our post-op patients, and he'd seen a patient who had done a disc replacement in the neck just, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And she said, "Oh, this patient really wants to see you." And so I walked over. As I was walking towards the room where she was in, she walks out and she runs towards me and she gives me a big hug.
Love it.
And goes, "Thank you so much." I mean this, it sounds cheesy and corny, but that is no question absolutely the best reward that you can get doing what we do, right? We get compensated super well as surgeons, and we make a great living. And I feel so fortunate to be able to do what I do. But at the end of the day, in terms of the reward that I get, is the patient who comes back and says, "Thank you so much for what you did for me," because there's really nothing else. Everything else is just an abstract, right? In terms of, we do the surgery, we submit claims to the insurance companies, they send money to our practice, it goes into a bank account. I mean, it's like all of that is like literally, I feel like, yes, it has some meaning. Obviously, it gives us the ability to take care of our kids and pay for our mortgage, all that stuff, right? So I don't take that for granted, trust me. But it is somewhat removed from the reality of life in terms of what's going on with that particular patient. It's a one-on-one, very, very personal relationship that you develop with that patient. They trust you with their bodies. I mean, they're going to go to sleep and they're going to let you, cut on them, right? And during that time, for those 2 hours when they're asleep, you're in that trust space with that patient. and doing everything you can to make them better. They wake up, and a few weeks later, you see them back in your clinic. And when they're thankful and they're doing well, there's nothing better than that.
There's a reason that we're sitting here with you today. Yeah. Your passion is infectious. The way you care about people is infectious.
Your servant heart.
Yeah, but you talk about the reason that you do it. Compensation is great, but at the end of the day, you are taking care of someone's mom, someone's dad, someone's sibling. And to see the power that has, it's interesting when, the first thing I asked was, why medicine or why spine? It's funny. It's like, how could you not? It's so, selfishly, it is the most fulfilling, rewarding feeling to have someone come to you at the end of the day and say, I never thought I'd see my husband walk again or play golf again or play with my grandkids again. And when you get to see that and just the amount of emotion that fills into that. And you've been a very gracious host to us out here. Many times we've gotten to know you very, very well. And even after we had everything set up and we were ready to go, the first thing you said to us was, I have to talk to the patient's family first, right? I mean, that is at the core of it. That's the reason that you do everything. That is what your focus is on. And I think that's the reason that, you've moved towards these motion preservation, techniques is that you see how that's impacted people's lives and how that's impacted parents and siblings and kids, because I think that has power in itself. And, there's a reason that we have been emotionally invested in you as well over the last few years, just being able to be part of that.
Well, no, thank you. I really appreciate that. And the passion I have for taking care of our patients is what keeps us going. It is the best reward I can get is seeing a patient who's doing well. As much as we strive to have 100% of our patients do stellarly, obviously a patient may have a complication, patient may have an issue that the outcome may not be exactly what they wanted or what I wanted, right? And what I can tell you on the flip side of things, right? You have a patient who comes back and just gives you a hug. You have a patient who comes back and who's struggling. I can tell you those are the ones that also absolutely torture you, right?
Yeah.
Not in the sense that they're intentionally torturing me, but the fact that they still have something. Was it something that I did that I missed? Or was it not the absolutely kind of whatever the problem may have been? It could be something as random as, if a patient happens to have a post-op infection, we do everything we can to keep things sterile, to absolutely avoid that if at all possible. But even that just hits you right in the chest, right in the heart, and you just kind of go like, man, what could I have done differently? Because you just never want to see that. So it's almost like you have this unbelievable motivation, which is the reward, right? To do well. You also have this unbelievable disincentive to also do really well because the opposite side, it hurts.
Yeah.
And I want to avoid that as much as I can. You want to stay on that, on the happy side of things. And so that's what drives me. That's what drives our entire staff to look at everything that we do every day, from how we see our patients in clinic and how we set them up for surgery and making sure that they understand everything that's going to happen to every little detail that happens in the operating room, how we take care of every little detail to make sure that we optimize the outcome.
I think it's funny because, if you went into the business or commercial world, you'd often hear a referral is the highest compliment that you can get, right? A referral to a colleague or a friend. Today, as we're talking to the people sitting here, it was actually a patient that you had operated on 15 years ago in their cervical spine that's now getting a lumbar. So if you want to talk about, a referral is the highest compliment, I think the highest compliment for your practice and what you've done here is getting patients that say, I'm not going anywhere else and I'm traveling,
across the country to
come see you and get another surgery done.
It is very humbling and very rewarding. So
absolutely. Yeah. There's one other thing that I want to ask you. You brought up this concept about just both personally and professionally, you hit these kind of forks in the road, right? And I think you don't know where you're heading or what the path is going to look like until you start down that road, right? And if you said, I want to drive down to LA tomorrow, but I can't see LA, so I'm not going to start, right? I always think about if it's foggy out, you're never going to get to your destination if you say, well, I can't see it, so I'm going to stop, right? You go 100 yards, you see where that is, you go 100 yards. You talked about Dr. Hodges. We've worked with him. I've had a very close relationship over the last 5 years with him. And I think he has done a lot of that for what he has looked at and moving spine forward, especially lumbar spine, and what he's done with Modus and driving this total joint replacement in the lumbar spine forward. I think you've done that same exact thing in your practice, right? If I'm correct, you've done 5-level cervical discs, stage procedures, yes, but 5-level, right? Yes. And I think most people would look at that and say, that is absolutely crazy, right? Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, the outcomes for those patients from what you've seen and what you've dealt with are better than going in and doing a fusion and then that on top of it. And I'm curious if you've kind of had that same, whether you want to talk about fork in the road or seeing fog and going 100 yards and seeing what that looks like, doing a 1-level cervical and saying, wow, that worked. And then doing a 2 and then doing a 3. Is that kind of how you've built your practice and your, insight into what am I driving towards? What am I really trying to build here is taking that next step and then saying, let's see how this goes. Because the truth of the matter is, like, usually the person at the front of the pack is taking the spears, right? Yeah. They're the ones taking the arrows and a lot of those times. So, it takes courage to step out there and do some of those things in spine care.
I think yes and no. I think I feel, again, very fortunate that generally speaking, when I talk to colleagues, and maybe it's the circle of colleagues that I have, but generally speaking, most of my colleagues respect what I do and respect kind of the direction that I've decided to push my abilities and my passions, right? I've also realized that failure is part of the learning process, but it's also, you have to treat that very, very carefully when it comes to what we do as spine surgeons, because a failure, just like we spoke about just a few minutes ago, would potentially mean someone's mom or someone's child. So when I started doing arthroplasty in 2006 in the cervical spine, right? Again, that's where I've kind of really focused a lot of my attention. Even though I love doing lumbar as well too, I just feel like I can name 50 other surgeons who I feel like are better at that than I am, right? But in the cervical spine, when I started doing it, I started with very, very small baby steps. I really wanted to learn as much as I could from every other surgeon that I came across who was even a year ahead of me or 5 years ahead of me, right? So anytime, when I first looked at the Mobi device in 2006, Dr. Thierry Dufour was here in the US and he was one of the guys who had used it in France. I picked his brain, I talked to him extensively, I asked him so many questions about it. I really wanted to know, I just wanted to absorb as much of his experience and knowledge as possible. And then building upon that was where then very carefully, very incrementally, without taking huge risks, without taking, huge steps, because you understand by taking a huge step, you're taking someone's life
Absolutely,
and their ability and their function and everything into that. It's not just me taking a risk, it's the patient taking a risk, right? So I feel like, my evolution over the past 17 years or so that I've been doing cervical arthroplasty has been very, very small baby steps with some failures where I can tell you again, I have to think about this, but I can tell you with great degree of certainty and honestly, with no catastrophic failures, right? Where someone is truly hurt, where yes, an implant may have subsided, an implant may have migrated, or I didn't really get a very good understanding perhaps early on how I should position the implant in its ideal position, what technique should I use? But along the way, you learn all that. Even despite all those things, I felt like the evolution was very, very small and incremental. It's taken a long time. And I'm nowhere close to that kind of the summit, right? Every time you get to a point where you feel pretty good, you're like, no, there's more to go. There's more to go. Again, whether it's myself or a young surgeon who's just coming out of training, or even an experienced surgeon who wants to adopt arthroplasty or adopt something like Modus into their practice, as I said, every one of us has to do it with great degree of humility and have the desire to be a student and learn it and do it correctly. That's common sense. You don't sit down at the piano and play the concerto first time you sit down.
Right.
You first start out with very simple, right, few exercises. And over a period of time, you get to a point where you can play music and it sounds good. And then perhaps if you really, really want to devote yourself, you become a concert pianist. At this point in time, I'm not a concert arthroplasty surgeon, but I feel like I'm getting pretty close. So hopefully, as time goes on, as we continue to work on this, both myself as well as some of my colleagues who are really believing in this philosophy of motion preservation, we can get there together and we can have options available to us as surgeons, both in the lumbar spine as well in the cervical spine, that allows us to give our patients better surgical outcomes.
I think it's to the point you just made, it's these incremental movements forward. And I think it's continuing to push the ball forward with the right people, right? Yeah. Because to your point, if you do have a catastrophic, as a surgeon, you can't have catastrophic failures. You have to stay away from as much as you can. It's the same for, a device or a company, right? A catastrophic failure could set you back far enough to where you don't know if that's going to hit the market, right? Yeah. So it's these little incremental changes, but it's constantly moving the ball forward, right? In education, in training, in getting the right people in the room, around the table, talking about the right things.
And being humble enough, like you said, to learn and know what you don't know and find the people that do or are willing to discover that with you.
Absolutely.
It's a big part of it.
And, I think there's also maybe some sort of either skepticism or negative image when it comes to the industry. I think very early on in my career, I realized that if it wasn't for the industry, if it wasn't for the folks behind what we call the industry, right? The innovators and the business people and everyone else who kind of believed in a concept, right?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for those people, I wouldn't have the tools that I have to do what I'm doing, right? I would still be, I guess we can go back 100, 150 years, right? We'll still be doing barber. So, we kind of do it, but we avoid the jugular vein. So it is, I mean, again, I look at a small company like 3 Spine, where it's just, I love working with small companies just because I see just this passion and drive, and you see really kind of the founders and the folks who were like behind the concept at every step of the way, and they just want to really, their heart is in the right place. It's not just about like, oh, we got to make this succeed so we can make money. I feel like that's secondary. What the primary goal is like, hey, I had this amazing concept. I tried it. It looks like it's working. And now I really want to see if it truly works on a bigger stage, right? And so far, I think the answer is looking pretty darn good, that it's going to work on a bigger stage.
Absolutely. And we're hoping the same thing. So we've been really lucky here to sit down with who we would consider the man in motion and spine, right?
The man in motion.
And I think that's true. I think that's true for your practice. But even in the last month, was it the World Championships for rowing? And I just want to make sure I get this correct, because please, if I'm correct, someone trained and did 600,000 meters on a rowing machine, and then also beat his PR on rowing with his, with his sun jack by his side.
To me, symbolically, it felt like World Championship, but it wasn't. It was maybe almost an Olympic championship. No. It was like, so my son got involved in rowing a couple of years ago, and people go like, where does he row in Salt Lake? Well, he rows on a dirty little canal, but they also, obviously over the wintertime, they train indoors. And I did a bit of rowing when I was in college as a freshman. So last year I went and saw them do the Utah Indoor Rowing Championship. And that kind of motivated me. I said, next year I want to give this a try. Back in September, I emailed his coach and I said, can you give me a training program to train over the next 3-4 months so he sent me a daily program. And not only I did that, I think some days I was doing 2 to 3 times as much, trying to kind of build my legs and build my endurance and everything else. And then in early January, I got sick. I was like, my lungs were just coughing up a storm. And I actually ended up also having a problem in my neck. And so it set me back a bit, but nonetheless, when the time came for the actual competition, I decided to do it anyway and went in there. And, I wasn't really sure, it's like one of those things where it feels, if you've been away from competition like that for a long time, it feels so alien, right? You walk, because I'm used to taking my kids to swim competitions and Jack we've been to a bunch of regattas. I can't tell you how nervous I felt going in there.
Is it fun to have that feeling again?
Yeah. I mean, it was like this, it's like, first of all, you just kind of go, okay, you've put in all this work. So you put in the work, but at the same time, you still aren't sure. Are you going to be able just to get on there? Are you going to maybe not push yourself hard enough? Because really the only thing I was trying to calibrate in my mind is like how hard, you kind of know the pace that you're shooting for. Should I go for that? Or should I kind of try to hold back a little bit? And then you're going to feel like you didn't give it your all? Or do I just kind of absolutely just
crush it,
right? So I got on the rowing machine, and my son was there, his crewmates, they were all behind me. And I started going, and I was just doing a blistering pace. I knew there's no way, I would die if I had kept that pace. So I kind of like, at the beginning, you're all excited, but it's only like a, 7.5 minute race. It's 2,000 meters. And so I did kind of pull it back just a little bit. I got through the first 1,000 meters and I was feeling pretty darn good, but I felt like, man, I am 100% anaerobic. There's absolutely nothing happening here on the kind of efficiency scale of like, energy production. So the next 500 meters, I was done. with 500 meters to go, I thought there's just no way I'm going to finish the next 500 meters. And really, under any other circumstance, if you're at home training or you're by yourself, I'm going to give it a 99.999% chance that you just stop.
Yep, absolutely.
But people like Jack was behind me, and his friends they were like screaming and yelling, "Come on, Dad, come on, come on." So it was surreal. It's like there were some photos that were taken during the race, and I got some of those pictures, and I have this look on my face of just like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I think it's out of body experience because it just doesn't look like I'm even conscious. There. I'm just like looking straight ahead at the, the computer, right? It's telling, and I'm just looking, and there's this blank look in my face, and I'm just like, just pulling as hard as I can. And when it was done, I literally kind of fell off the erg, and I lay there for a good, probably 10 minutes, thinking to myself, if I'm going to live,
am I going to make it?
But it was the best, stress test for my heart I've ever done.
Yeah.
I bet.
Yeah.
So it wasn't World, but it was Utah Indoor Rowing Championship, and it wasn't the Masters division. So I just want to say this is not a rookie league. Yeah. This is not a rookie league.
Yeah, well, the Masters, by definition, it sounds like these are the experts. Well, I mean, pretty much everyone who was in it has rowed before, right?
Yeah.
The reason why it's called Masters, that's a very nice euphemism for being old. Okay?
Perspective,
so
yeah.
Above certain age, you get into the
what you did is pretty cool.
You get into the Masters category. So within the Masters category, yes, I took second place, which was, as I said, for me, it was as good as World Championship or Olympic Championship. Yeah.
I urge anyone, because those pictures are phenomenal. Yeah. I've seen the pictures; they're phenomenal. So I urge anyone who is not following you on LinkedIn for your spine knowledge to do it for life updates. Yeah, for life updates, because that's absolutely amazing. But I truthfully wanted to bring that full circle, because I think you are a person that in your personal and professional life likes to push the bounds of what is possible, right?
Yeah.
And what the future can be, not what it is right now. And whether it's erging at, an indoor championship,
being a master.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Or biking across the country or hiking mountains. Right. I'm curious from your standpoint, what you see your next step is, or what your passion is in spine for what you're driving forward. We've seen, we've talked to a couple surgeons who are doing a lot of hybrid cases, right? So above or below a fusion to protect adjacent segments. We're seeing some guys that are now reversing cervical fusions and putting in disc replacements. I'm curious whether it's cervical or lumbar, or truthfully something outside of that, what you see as, your next step of something that you're really passionate about, or you really want to drive forward in spine.
Yeah, obviously our everyday life as a surgeon revolves around patient care. And then as we get more mature in our practice, and as we get towards kind of the twilight years of our practice, and, I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to that, but who knows, right? None of us is going to be practicing forever. I think we start thinking, what can we do that contributes to spine care? What purpose, and how can we maybe make a change for the better? Mm-hmm. And truly, I mean this, my philosophy towards motion preservation was sparked by kind of that dramatic difference that I saw between my change in my orthopedic training rotation between total joints and going to spine, right? Mm-hmm. Going from knee and hip replacement to seeing fusion, and kind of wondering why that was still the case. So I would feel incredibly gratified and satisfied as I come towards the end of my career and I finish and I look back, feel a sense of a bit of accomplishment as well as a bit of pride that I was able to do things in a way that helped change spine surgery for better. How successful I will be, whether that's very small or slightly bigger than that, I don't know. I think that type of assessment can only be done by others, right? I think it's not something that I would be the one who says, oh, I think I did amazing, right? I think it's just going to be whether it's your patients who are very, very gratified and satisfied with what you did for them, or your colleagues who may look and say, yeah, I did do a training with Dr. K, and he helped me change the way I practice and the way I take care of my patients. So I think if I can do that over the next few years, there'll be a very satisfying way to achieve what were my goals when I started out as orthopedic spine surgeon. But in terms of how things will evolve over the next few years, I do hope that more and more surgeons come to see the light when it comes to functional spine surgery. I'm the first one to admit, and I even told you that earlier today I did 2 cases. One was motion preserving, one wasn't. At least what we have right now in terms of the technology that we have as it stands today, I don't see spinal fusion completely going away. But I have no doubt that as the next generation and the one after that comes around, they will figure out ways to almost completely eliminate functional kind of subtraction or the functional removal that takes place now when we're doing spine surgery majority of the time, right? So right now, majority of the instrumented spinal surgical cases are fusions. I hope that we continue to evolve more and more towards motion preserving, and ultimately there will come a day, just like we have it now with the hips and knees, that technology will be available and techniques will be available and understanding of the spine will evolve to the point where we no longer have to put screws and lock the spine into place, you know?
And I think the key word that you use there that I love is functional, right? Yeah. Functional spine surgery. How do we bring the correct function back? And whether that's like in every, like from a biomechanics standpoint, it's how do we make it function how it was supposed to function? But from a big picture, it's how can we get the human body to function as it should, right? To have longevity, to be able to go on long bike rides and do hikes and all these things that we're meant to do and to do as humans. For me, that's, you know, there's, like we talked about earlier, there's pain reduction, but then there's this quality of life and functional aspect of it that I think, you know, you're driving towards. And there's obviously a reason that we're sitting around this table right now and we have that same passion, right? Is what can we do to, whether it's a 1% change or a 10% change or greater, to increase what spine care looks like in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years down the road.
And you know, we all obviously have goals, and part of my goal has been to, once again, going back to what you just mentioned, which is providing functional spine surgery. Now, I may not be able to achieve that 100% of the time, but you have to start out with that goal. And it's like any other problem. Just like when you sit down and try and solve a math problem or a physics problem, I mean, there are still some mathematical problems that there are no solutions to it, but there's no reason for us to believe that there won't be one. There will someone come along who will figure out. That right there is, in a nutshell, the human history, right? If we look back to how, especially over the past 100, 150 years, the type of progress that we humans as a species have made, it has been as a result of someone thinking of something that was not achievable at that time. But then whether it was 5 years, 10 years, or a generation or two later, that ultimately that goal was achieved. So I really, really have no doubt that we will get to that point. But for now, we'll take these small incremental steps, whether it's the way I do surgery and the way I change my technique, the way I use the different tools available to me, to the way the industry helps us evolve and develop and innovate new implants for us to be able to achieve the ultimate goal, which once again is functional spine surgery.
Well, it's been a lot of fun moving through the fog with you, just with Modus in general, but also just thank you so much for your time today in this conversation. It's always fun to talk to you. We love coming here. So thank you for hosting us.
Well, thank you for coming, and I hope we can have this conversation again in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And maybe reflect back.
Yeah.
And are able to celebrate some of the changes and some of the achievements that, at least for now, we're hoping for, but we don't know for certain that it's going to happen, right?
Yeah. And we're here. We're fortunate that you have hosted us. We're fortunate that we've got to know you. You know, we're sitting in this snow globe fairy tale land of Park City. The snow is falling behind us.
It's still going back there.
The ski slopes are full, and you've given us a ton of your time. But as we've gotten to know you, you are pushing the ball forward in functional spine care. And you've done an immense amount of research with a lot of devices. There's one research report that I did really want to know about. I really wanted to ask you about, and I'm not sure how much data is behind it, but you founded this center, you founded the Master Spine Institute, and I believe you've also founded the first ever cannoli wars between Modern Pastry and Mike's Pastry. And from a guy who lived in Boston for 5 years, I just want to know how this study was ran, because this is what really matters here. Because I believe that you were the one that started the cannoli wars yourself. So
I need to know all about this.
Well, you got to have some fun too, right? I don't know if I was the first one to call it the cannoli wars. Maybe I was, right? But it sounds like something out of a Godfather movie.
I heard there was a little bias present, but still some statistical analysis on who holds the best cannoli in Boston.
Listen,
you had me on the edge of my seat of like, what is he about to talk about?
All right. Well,
I had to know. I've been to both, and I heard you had a statistical sampling. So,
well, you lived in Boston. Anyone who's lived in Boston and perhaps even visited Boston, right? And goes to the North End. There's a couple really famous pastry shops, I think within 100 yards of each other on the opposite side of the street, Modern Pastry and Mike's Pastry. And as someone who's, spent my undergraduate years in Boston, we would always kind of argue amongst ourselves, with friends. We'd go down North End, get some pizza, and then afterwards go get cannolis. And there was always this back and forth, which one is better. And I think after a while, I felt like it became religion. You eat both of them and you go like, no, this one is definitely better. And then you just stick with it. And then you stick to your guns, right? So, and then no one's going to change your mind. So interestingly, when I went back for my college reunion, I went back with my family. And previously when I got back with my wife, I had told her about the two different places, and she kind of had her preference too. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to do with our kids. So our kids, now that they're teenagers, I was like, all right, we're going to run a blinded study and an experiment. What we're going to do, we're going to go to both places. We're going to have them freshly fill the cannolis, which what makes both these places really, really good is you literally say what kind of cannoli you want, which I'm a purist, I just want the regular shell, no chocolate, no other toppings on top. I just want a regular shell with a good plain ricotta filling and a little bit of powdered sugar on top. That's it. That's almost like the purist who likes a good old Neapolitan pizza, right? Yes. They don't want all these fancy toppings of like pear and, in any case, so we got the plain cannolis freshly filled, and then we took them back to the Airbnb where we were renting. And I said, what we're going to do is I'm going to cut them up, and then we're going to blind you, like literally put on a blindfold, and then you're going to take a taste of one, and then we're going to have you swish your mouth with the water, and you're going to take a test of the other.
So official.
And then we're going to do this a couple times, right? So we're trying to remove bias. We're trying to kind of remove, at least kind of remove some of the statistical issue that comes along with it. And at the end of the day, there was 4 of us who kind of did this experiment. 3 out of 4 preferred Modern Pastry. So
wow. Well, I know the next place we're doing our podcast, and it's going to be a pastry war.
Right inside of Mike's and Modern Pastry.
There you go.
Exactly.
So the cool thing was, just out of, I'm not a prolific poster on LinkedIn, but I do post whenever I come across what I think is an interesting case or something where I can talk about and stimulate the community to talk about it. When I was in Boston, I did this whole thing. I was like, this would be kind of interesting just to put it out there. So I did end up posting it on LinkedIn. And it was interesting to get everyone chiming in, even people who were in spine surgeons, right? Just for whatever reason, I guess, I don't know if I put some sort of keywords in there that kind of brought them to the post, but there were people just started like, no, that's better than this. No, I prefer this. And at the end I said, yep, it's just like religion, it's one or the other,
like
there's really no objective criteria, really. They're both amazing.
Absolutely.
They're both as far as when it comes to cannolis, I've never been anywhere. I've been to Italy too. The cannoli in the Boston area is the best cannoli that there is, at least in these 2 pastry shops, right?
So good.
So it was just one of those fun things you do. You kind of put it out there and you just have some fun with it.
If that's not a spine surgeon running a study, I don't know what it is.
Exactly.
Blinding your own family.
Yes. Well, and you are a fun person to follow. I always love seeing your posts. I learn a lot from them. And then it's also fun to see, what you're doing in your life. For those listening, patient, surgeon, anyone, where can they find you? What is your practice? Just to kind of wrap this up, how can people find you?
Yeah. So, we try to put as much information as we can on our website. I feel like that's the best way for people to find us. And our website is the disc replacementcenter.com. We do have another website called mastersofspine.com. We carry a fair amount of content on there trying to explain what we do with motion preservation, with disc replacement. There's some videos on there. There's some, information on there relating to the option available to them compared to fusion, right? Which is really, as I said, there are so many patients that are still being told that they need fusion. There used to be time. I'll tell you one more thing. I know we've kind of gone on for some time. I don't even know how long into this conversation we're in.
It's great.
But there used to be time where if I'd see a patient for a second opinion or a third opinion,
you'd add a pastry in there for them to decide on.
That would have been great.
That would have been some patients,
yeah. Yeah, it was like offer free cannolis. No, I felt, I don't know, there was this sense of like, I'm like stealing this patient from someone else, from another surgeon, right? And just for whatever reason, I felt like, well, I'm offering, the patient came to me for an opinion. I'm telling what I would do. Patient chooses to stay here. But there was still this sense of like, gosh, I guess I stole this patient from another surgeon who perhaps had taken care of that patient through their non-operative care, and then they came to need surgery. They're being told they need fusion. They come to me. I tell them, no, I can do something different. They stay with me. And then there was a shift. And I don't know if this was like some sort of a justification or not, but there was a shift. And the shift was my perspective, right? Which is like, for that first little while, it was like what I was feeling, what was my issue with that process, right? That I felt like, I felt like maybe I stole this patient from another surgeon. The shift was that I looked at it from the patient's perspective. I looked at it from patient perspective and from the patient's perspective. And this is something that happened when one of my patients told me this after surgery. She said, Dr. K, thank you for saving me from fusion.
Wow.
Okay. So then it just clicked in my head. And I know I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but ever since then, whenever I see a patient and I tell them no, I mean, especially when I see young patients, whenever I tell them, no, you're definitely a very good arthroplastic candidate, we're going to do this replacement for you. Now I feel like I'm saving that patient from fusion rather than that I'm stealing that patient from another surgeon. So hopefully that kind of gives, a good perspective or a good ending to our conversation.
It absolutely is.
Perfect.
I mean, they're just as thankful as, they can be for those sort of things. But
it wraps it up perfectly.
It is. I was going to say, Dr. Khachatryan, thank you so much for taking all your time, not just today, but over the past few years of us, getting to know you truthfully, friendship-wise, but imparting your wisdom, knowledge, not on just us, but patients, the community, and the spine community as a whole, because, the direction we're moving wouldn't be happening without guys like you. So,
well, thank you for putting this all together. It's pretty fun. Actually, I'm really enjoying sitting here looking at the snow outside. It's just like, it almost feels like Christmas morning.
That's exactly right. We feel the same way. Well, thank you so much.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
We'll see each other soon.
Sounds great. Thanks.